My dear student in the first secondary stage, welcome at Integrated Science Program. My name is Mr. Hani Muhammad. I am a teacher of Integrated Science. This session is prepared by Mr. Hani Muhammad and revised by the science subject expert Mr. Amri Mali. And now let's continue our Integrated Science Program with the first unit, Aquatic Ecosystem, Lesson 6, Biological Adaptations of Living Organisms in Aquatic Environments. First of all, we need to know the concept of adaptation. Adaptation, the behavioral or physical traits of a living organism that help it survive better in its ecosystem. Again, the adaptation is the behavioral or physical traits of a living organism that help it survive better in its ecosystem. And now let's go for a different example for more clarification about the concept of adaptation. Look carefully to this picture. We have polar bear and polar fox. What the common things you notice in this picture? Yes, you are right. Both of them have a heavy fur that help them to overcome the extremely low temperatures in the polar areas. Also, the fur of both of them is white in color. Why? To help them to hide from their enemy. So this is a kind of adaptation that help the bear and the fox to live and survive in the polar areas. Okay? Another example, giraffe. Look carefully to the giraffe. You notice that it has a long neck that help the giraffe to reach the green leaves at the top of the trees. This is also a kind of adaptation that help the giraffe to survive in its environment. Another example, the camel, which is live in the desert with a hard conditions of strong wind, the high temperature, and the sand dune, and all of this hard condition, the camel can withstand and overcome of these conditions by a certain features he has in its body. So this is also a kind of adaptation. Another example for the adaptation, it is the chameleon, which has a different color, and it also had a character of changing its color to be adapt with the environment surround it. So this is also another example for adaptation. Okay, so the adaptation in general help the living organism to survive and continue alive in its environment. And now, my dear student, we need to know the types of the adaptations. Okay, the first, structural adaptation or anatomical adaptation. So what is meant by the structural adaptation? The changing in the structure and the shape of parts of living organisms that help it survive in its environment. Repeat again the definition with me. Yes, the changing in the structure and the shape of parts of a living organism that help it survive in its environment. Okay, so now let's talk about example to clarify this concept, the structural or anatomical adaptations. The first example, the streamlined body that reduced water resistance to the fish movement. Look to this picture. This is a fish, okay? It has a streamlined shape that helps the fish to move easily inside the water, and also that decrease the resistance of the water to the fish movement. So this is an example for what? Yes, for structural adaptation. Okay, so the streamlined body that reduce water resistance to the fish movement. Okay, Let's go for another example. I want all of you to look carefully to the picture of this bolty fish, okay? And if you look, you will notice the body of the fish is covered by scales, and also it's covered by mucus. The mucus, it gives the fish a touch like what? Like the soap, okay? So you cannot catch the fish easily. It will slip from your hand. Okay, both of them, the scales and the mucus that cover the body, it reduce the water resistance to the fish movement. So the scales and also the mucus, it's also help to decrease the resistance of the water to the fish movement. Okay, I think it's clear. Let's go for another example for the structural or anatomical adaptations. Look carefully to this fish, okay? You will notice it has a big fins that help the fish to change its direction inside the water. And this is called by the organs of locomotion that help the fish to change its direction, whatever, to the left, to the right, front, and backward, and so on. So the third example, yes, the fins are the organs of locomotion that help the fish to change its direction inside the water. Another example, yes, the gills enable the fish to extract dissolved oxygen from water. Look carefully to this faint red, which called by the gills, and it's found in the both sides of the fish head. Okay, and the main function of the gills to absorb or extract the dissolved oxygen from water. Okay, so this is also a kind of structural adaptation. Okay, there is a kind of a change that's happened in an organ or a part of the fish that help the fish to stay alive, okay, in its environment. Okay, another example. Yes, this diagram represents the internal structure of a fish. Okay, this white shape, it's called by swim bladder, okay, or air sac, which help the fish to float in the water. If the fish wanted to move up or move down, that will help it to do this action. Okay, so the swimming bladder here, it helped the fish to float in water. And this is also a kind of structural or anatomical adaptation that help the fish to stay alive in its environment. Okay, another example. Yes, I want all of you from the first observation for this fish. What is the weird thing you can see in the fish? Excellent. We can notice that it has a wide eyes. Okay, and these wide eyes help the fish to see in the dark, in the deep areas in the ocean. Okay, so this is a kind of structural adaptation. The fish that live deep in ocean has very large eyes to enable it to see in the dark. Okay, so if you look to the eyes again, yes, it's extremely wide eyes, okay, that help the fish to see in the dark areas, especially in the deep oceans. Okay, so this is also a kind of structural adaptation. Okay, let's go for another example, which is, yes, the fish live deep, their bodies are compressed to withstand the extremely high pressure in deep waters, such as ice fish. This picture represents the ice fish, okay? And the ice fish, it has a compressed body, and the compressed body help the fish to withstand the extremely high pressure, especially in the deep areas in the oceans. Okay, so again, this is a kind of structural adaptation or anatomical adaptation. Okay, so when I ask you why this fish looks like a compressed body, so the answer here, to withstand the extremely high pressure in deep waters such as ice fish. So the name of this fish called by the ice fish. Okay, another example. Dolphins are mammals. They have streamlined shape and fins instead of legs. عفوا هقول الجزء ده تاني. Another example, dolphins are a mammal. They have a streamlined shape and fins instead of legs to help them swim. Also, they have a breathing opening at the top of their heads instead of the nose that allow them to breathe the atmospheric air. I think all of you see the dolphin before, okay? If you look to the top of the dolphin head, you can find an opening. This opening helps the dolphin to breathe the atmospheric air because the dolphin, it is not a fish. No, it is a mammal. But there is a structural adaptation happen to the dolphin. Instead, having legs, no, it has a fins, okay? Instead, having gills, no, it has an opening and it has a lung to respire what? Yes, the atmospheric air, okay? Okay, my dear friend, my dear student, أعيد الجزء ده تاني. Okay, my dear student, now let's go to the next type of the adaptation. It's behavioral adaptation. So what is the behavioral adaptation? Yes, a certain behavior or action, whether inherited or learned, that helps living organisms face harsh conditions of better utilize the available resources. So this is a kind of a change in the behavior. There is no change in the structure of the body or something like that. Just the behavior of the body change, of the living organism change, okay, to adapt the conditions of the environment where he lives. Okay, so again, the behavioral adaptation, a certain behavior or action, whether inherited. And inherited here, it means the living organism already born with this character or with this trait. Okay, or learned, it means by the time the living organism gain a certain skill to do something. Okay, so a certain behavior or action, whether inherited or learned, that helps living organisms face harsh conditions or better utilize the available resources. So this is the definition of the behavioral adaptation. Okay, so for more clarification, let's talk about some examples. Whales. I think, as you know, whales, it is the most giant creatures on the earth. Okay? Whales produce sounds that allow them to communicate and hunt their prey. Yes, I think if you go to any program like a TV show, okay, or National Geographic, you can listen to the sound of what? Of the whales, okay? And this sound, it is a kind of communication language between the whales themselves, okay? That help them to communicate and also help them to hunt their prey. So this is a kind of what? Yes, this is a kind of behavioral adaptation. So the behavior of the whale change. They begin to use their sound, okay, as a communication and also to help them to hunt their prey. Okay? Another example for what? Yes, keep concentrated with me, please. Yes, this is salmon fish. The salmon fish, if you look to this picture, we have many or thousands of the salmon fish, which migrate between fresh water and salt water for reproduction and survival. So here there is no any change in the structure of the salmon fish, but the behavior of the salmon change here. Okay, it begins the journey from the salty water to the fresh water to lay their eggs and continue its life cycle. Okay, so the salmon fish here is example for behavioral adaptation. And I will repeat that again. The behavior here means that there is a kind of action, okay, the living organism do it, okay, to overcome some conditions which found in its environment, and he can live, okay, efficiently in the environment surround it. Okay, I think it is very clear. The third type of the adaptation is called by the physiological or functional adaptation. Again, physiological or functional adaptation. Let's go to know more about the physiological or functional adaptation. Yes, the modifications in how they perform their vital functions that enable them to survive in their environment. So here we will talk about the change in the or a modification happen in the part or in the organ of the living organism. This is called by, yes, physiological or functional adaptation. Okay, so for more clarification, let's go for examples. Some fish that live in deep ocean have special abilities to regulate respiration under oxygen deficiency conditions, where they can slow down their metabolic rate to reduce their oxygen requirement. So this is a kind of physiological, yes, physiological adaptation. Okay, the fish here, which live in the deep ocean, it has certain or a special abilities to regulate the respiration under what? Yes, the oxygen deficiency. So in the deep ocean, okay, the oxygen, it is rare. It is not like the shallow areas, okay? So the fish here try to slow down their metabolic process. And as you know from the previous lesson, the metabolic process here help to consume more oxygen. So the living organism here, or the fish here, need to reduce what? Yes, reduce the metabolic rate. So if the metabolic rate decrease, the consumption of the oxygen will also decrease. Okay, so this is an example for physiological or functional adaptation. Okay, let's go for another example. Some fish have ability to efficiently regulate blood pressure to be proportional to the high pressure exerted on them in the deep ocean or in the deep areas. Okay, the pressure there, it is extremely high pressure, and there is some kind of fish that have the ability to efficiently regulate the blood pressure. It can control the blood pressure to make it proportional to what? To the pressure exerted on it. And this has helped to keep the life of the fish, okay? And help also the fish to overcome, yes, to overcome what? Yes, to overcome the hard conditions. What are these hard conditions? Yes, the high pressure inside or at the deep oceans. Okay, so this is also a kind of what? Physiological adaptation or functional adaptation, where as function in the living organism change to adapt with the environment. Another example, some fish have strong and durable arteries and veins to withstand the pressure. Yes, the veins and the arteries of those kind of fish, strong, very strong. Why it's very strong? Yes, to withstand the pressure, especially in the deep areas. So you notice here, the function here change, okay? And the arteries becomes very strong, and also the veins becomes very strong, okay? That help the fish to overcome or withstand the extremely high pressure, especially in the deep areas in the ocean, okay? So now let's talk about special cases. You know the viper fish? The viper fish has two kinds of adaptation, structural and physiological adaptation at the same time. Okay, let's look. This is a viper fish. It looks like the dragon, but it has a different features that help it to stay alive, especially in the deep oceans. What are these features or characters? It is characterized by flexible of its skeletal structures to withstand high pressure in the depth. Yes, its skeletal system is flexible. And flexible here mean it can withstand what? Yes, the high pressure exerted on its body. So this is a kind of what? It's a kind of adaptation. Okay, the structure here of the skeleton it changed. Instead of a strong skeletal system, no, it's flexible. Okay, that will help the fish to stay alive, especially in the deep areas. What else for the viper fish? Yes, it also has a high concentration of the hemoglobin in its blood to adapt to the decreased oxygen levels in the depth. Yes, this is also a kind of what? A kind of adaptation. The ratio of the hemoglobin, it has a high concentration of hemoglobin. Okay, that help it to decrease the oxygen level in the depth. Okay? And now, my dear students, don't forget and remember very important thing. The osmotic pressure. Look to the diagram or the picture in your right hand side, okay? The water will flow from the area of low concentration, which has a high osmotic pressure, to the area of high concentration, which has low osmotic pressure. Okay, so if you apply this idea on the living organism, whatever in the fresh water, in the salty water, okay, we can understand more how those kind of the living organism can adapt with the environmental conditions. Again, I will repeat the meaning of the osmotic pressure. This part, okay, it has a low concentration, okay, and the left side here, it has a high concentration. So the water will flow from the low concentrated solution of high osmotic pressure to the high concentrated solution with low osmotic pressure, okay? And this idea will help the living creatures in the salty water or fresh water to stay alive. Let's see how this will happen. Physiological adaptation of freshwater organisms to low osmotic pressure. In this case, large amounts of fresh water pass into the body of these organisms. Why? because the concentration inside the body of this organism is higher than the concentration surround it in the fresh water. So the fresh water will flow from the low concentrated, high osmotic pressure to the high concentration. It is the body of the living organism which has low osmotic pressure. So by the time the body of the living organism will, yes, will fill up with what? With water. So the bodies of these organisms get rid of from the excess water to prevent their bodies from rusting. So this kind of the living organism always try to overcome or to هاي الجزء ده تاني. In this case, large amount of fresh water passes into the bodies of these organisms. So the bodies of these organisms get rid of the excess water to prevent their bodies from rusting. Okay? So let's go for another thing. Unicellular organisms such as amoeba, paramecium, and euglena have a cellular structure called, yes, contractile vacuoles. Yes, where the cell collects excess water, then pushes it toward the cell membrane to discharge the water from inside to outside the cell. Okay, look carefully. This is amoeba, and this is paramecium, and this is euglena. Okay, and all of them live in where? In the fresh water. So the concentration of the fresh water is less than the concentration inside the body of euglena or paramecium or amoeba. So if we apply the osmosis concept, so the water will flow from outside to inside the euglena or paramecium or amoeba. So by the time the body of this living organism will fill by the water, so it needs to get rid of from this water. How this happen? By the contractile vacuole, okay, which help the amoeba or paramecium or euglena to get rid of the excess water. Okay, so this is a physiological adaptation of freshwater organism to the low osmotic pressure. Okay, another one, if we go to the salty water, what will happen? The opposite of the previous parts. Okay, physiological adaptation of salt water organisms to high atmospheric to high osmotic pressure. Okay, most fish that live in salty water needs to swallow large amount of seawater to compensate the water they lose from their bodies due to the osmosis. Then they excrete excess salts through the kidneys and specialized cell in the gills. Okay, so the salty water has a high concentration than the body of the living organism. So if we apply the osmosis here, the water will flow from inside the living organism to outside, so that the organism need to swallow more water to keep itself alive. Okay? Also, let's talk about the shark. And this is also example for a physiological adaptation of salt water organisms to high osmotic pressure. Sharks maintain water and salt balance inside their bodies in a different way. They retain a high concentration of urea in their blood, which increases their osmotic pressure to become close to the osmotic pressure of the surrounding water. So that will help the shark to not losing more water from its body or gain more water. Okay, so the shark maintains water and salt balance inside their body. How is that? They retain high concentration of urea in their blood, which increase their osmotic pressure to become close to the osmotic pressure of the surrounding water. Okay? And now, my dear student, let's go for check your understanding. Okay? Let's start by the first question. It refers to the behavioral or physical traits of living organisms that help it to survive better in its ecosystem. Transpiration, adaptation, respiration, excretion. Try to think. I will repeat the question again, and please leave everything in your hand and concentrate it with me. Again, it refers to the behavioral or physical traits of living organisms that help it to survive better in its ecosystem. Yes, this is the right answer. Excellent. This is the adaptation concept. Okay? So the adaptation, it refers to the behavioral or physical traits of living organism that helps it to survive better in its ecosystem. Okay? Next, the streamlined body of the fish helps in all the following except swim easily in water, decreasing the water resistance on fish body, keep the fish balance in water, help the fish to float. Yes, except what? Yes, that's right. Help the fish to float. Why? Because the air sac help the fish to float. Okay, so the question was the streamlined body. We talk about the streamlined body, okay, of the fish helps in all the following except, yes, except it cannot help the fish to float in the water. And the air sac or swimming sac help the fish to float up or down. Okay, another question. The function of air sac in the bony fish is help the fish to swim easily, allow the fish to float in water, help the fish to breathe, storing nutrients. Try to think. I think I mentioned that before in the first question. Yes, the answer is allow the fish to float in water. If the fish wanted to move up or move down, that will happen by the effect of what? Of the, yes, the air sac. Okay? Another question. Which of the following is from the reason of the special structure adaptation in the deep ocean fish? High nitrogen level, low osmotic pressure, high oxygen level, low light transparency. Again, which of the following is from the reason of the special structure adaptation where, yes, in deep ocean fish, high nitrogen level, low osmotic pressure, high oxygen level, or low light transparency? Excellent, you are right. Low light transparency. Let's go for the next question. Which of the following is from the structural adaptation of the dolphin? The presence of large-sized gills, the large-sized eyes, the presence of air bladder, the presence of breathing opening at the top of head. Yes, this is right answer again. The presence of breathing opening at the top of head. Okay, my dear student, let's go for another question. Try to follow me and read with me. Viper fish has a high concentration of hemoglobin in its blood to adapt to the lack of oxygen, high salinity, high pressure, darkness. Yes, that's right. Lack of oxygen. So that it has what? High concentration of hemoglobin that help to carry more oxygen, okay, to the different parts of the fish. It's good. Another question. The multicellular organisms like fish, they get rid of excess water through the kidneys in the form of what? Concentrated urine, diluted urine, nitrogen gas, carbon dioxide. Try to think. It's not an easy question. I will repeat the question again and listen and concentrate. The multicellular organism like fish, they get rid of excess water through the kidneys in the form, yes, concentrated urine, diluted urine, nitrogen gas, carbon dioxide. Excellent. Yes, diluted urine. Another question, my dear student. Which of the following doesn't belong to the structural adaptation of fish? Streamlined body, fins, scales, respiration. Yes, good. Respiration process. It's not belong to what? Structural adaptation. Some fish that live in ocean depth possess special abilities to regulate respiration under oxygen deficient conditions, where they can slow down their excretion rate, metabolic rate, motion rate, reproduction rate. Yes, you are right, metabolic rate. Because as you know, the metabolic rate help in consuming more oxygen. And in the conditions of lack of oxygen, we need to reduce the metabolic process or the metabolic rate in your body to decrease the consumption of oxygen. Another question. Sharks maintain water and salt balance inside their bodies by retain a high concentration of plankton in their blood, urea, nutrients, salt, nitrogen gas. That's right. Excellent. Urea. So the sharks maintain water and salt balance inside their bodies by retain a high concentration of, yes, of urea in their body. And this is a kind of adaptation that helps the shark to stay alive in its environment. That's good, right? Another question, my dear student. Which of the following adaptation enable deep sea fish to cope with oxygen deficiency? Slowing metabolic rate, compressed body, increase salt concentration in cells, strong blood vessels. Again, this is not an easy question. We need to concentrate more. Which of the following adaptation enable deep sea fish to cope with oxygen deficiency? Slowing metabolic rate, compressed body, increased salt concentration in cells, strong blood vessels. Excellent. Yes, slowing metabolic rate. Okay? And now let's go for the essay question. In the opposite diagram, mention the name and the function of the labeled organ. Okay, look to the picture first. We have two things, 1 and 2. Okay, if you look to 1, it refers to the fence. Yes, and 2 refer to the air sac or swimming bladder. So what is the function of the swimming bladder? As we mentioned before, it helps the fish to float. If the fish wanted to move up or to move down in the water, so it needs to use what? Yes, the sac air or swimming bladder. So what about number 1? Yes, number 1, it is a fence, which I mentioned before. It is a locomotion system of the fish that help the fish to change its direction, to move forward, backward, left and right, and so on. Okay, so the question here in the opposite diagram mention the name and the function of the labeled diagram. Okay, so number 1, the name is, yes, fence. That's right. Its function, the organs of locomotion. Good. Number 2, swimming bladder. That's good. Yes, the function is float in water. Okay, and both of them, it's a kind of what? Yes, a kind of structural adaptation that help this fish to stay alive in its what? Yes, in its environment. This is the last question for our program today. Okay, so my dear students, this is the end of our lesson for today. I hope all of you understood well. See you next time and goodbye.